The last item I have under my report is, I believe there was a news item last week. The state comptroller was in town over the summer. The last time the state comptroller audited the village was in 2001. Ironically, the village reached out to the comptroller's office in 2012, which was a year after we implemented ambulance billing. And we were also going through a change in the treasurer's office at the time. And so we asked the comptroller if they would please come to the village, audit us because it had been over a decade, and specifically focus on the ambulance side of things because billing was new to us. And we wanted to make sure we were doing things correctly. The comptroller's office politely declined and said, we'll get to you when we get to you. There's 700 municipalities in New York State, get in line. 6 years later, 2018, we received notification of a comptroller audit without any specific scope. The two gentlemen that I met with when they began the audit, very capable auditors, didn't have any decision as to what they were going to focus on, if anything. They were going to begin their audit in a very general fashion. But interestingly enough, they did decide after a few weeks of looking through everything that they wanted to focus on the ambulance fund and on billing. It's a little quirk of state finance law that when a municipality is being audited, they're not allowed to speak of it. When the draft report is released to the municipality, they're not allowed to disseminate it or discuss it in open meeting. Only when the final report is issued can we speak of it. So we've been going back and forth with the comptroller's office for the last few months discussing their findings. Essentially, their findings are that there were discrepancies in how monies received in billing were allocated back to the municipalities on whose behalf the billing was conducted. One of the concerns we had, and this is not to lay blame at all, but one of the concerns we had when we requested the audit in 2012 was, A, we'd never done this before. And B, we had significant concerns at the time that because of the nature of medical billing, particularly with respect to HIPAA, how do we reconcile medical claims submitted on behalf of a patient versus the money received for those claims, which are always different than what the bill is, versus municipal funds, which are supposed to funnel through the treasurer's office, who is not authorized necessarily to see patient information. So the decision that was made without the comptroller's guidance, and our third-party auditor who does our general auditing said, well, as long as the budget's balanced, it seems fine, was to keep receipts separate, which was correct. The comptroller agreed that keeping money received from insurance companies separate is good. And then the EMS manager, for HIPAA reasons, would reconcile the receipts with what was billed, and then would submit a report to the treasurer to disperse that money to the towns on whose behalf those receipts were received. And it seemed to work just fine. And overall, the discrepancy amounts to about 1% of the roughly $1.6 million that have been received, both for the village and the three towns since 2011. Our plan for how to make up overpayments to one particular town and underpayments to a couple of others is simply to make up the underpayment. I believe we'll do that in January. We'll get the numbers to Ulysses and Covert of what we're going to reimburse those towns for the amounts that were underpaid. And then we'll have a conversation with Hector about taking the amounts that they were overpaid and building it into their next year's budget contract. And as is the risk with running a department, we'll have to wait that time period to get that back. The good news is that the comptroller did find every penny, so we didn't have any concerns about where the money was going or was there misallocation of funds somehow. Every penny is accounted for, It's just that some of the remittances weren't accurately accounted for. The discrepancy itself seems to be, for the most part, due to the way fees were calculated to the third-party billing company. So MedX, which is the third-party billing company we use, keeps a portion of the billing revenue as their income. And it makes a difference when you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of calls over 7 years, whether you are factoring their fee on a per claim, per call, or per municipality rate. And that's why I'm not an auditor, is because they had the fellows from the comptroller's office had to go through 7 years of that to figure out where that discrepancy laid. And they did find it, so that's helpful. I did thank them both for helping us, because this is very helpful in terms of where are the lines between HIPAA and accounting rules, and what are some of the best practices to put in place, given the fact that the EMS department is growing in terms of call volume, growing in terms of billing revenue, so that we can more accurately account for everything going forward. The audit does require a action plan to be submitted within 90 days. In this case, it's fairly straightforward, fairly simple in terms of the recommendations they made to the village to better run the revenue generating side of the EMS department. If there are any questions about it, I would take them now. We don't have to wait till public comment period, but I did want to.
Well, I imagine we can also just share that report, right? So you guys can see the actual numbers when you're.
Right, we got to see in the weekly report that comes from the New York State Comptroller, they have so a link to a brief summary of the report. But
Right.
yeah, that would be great.
That's the report.
Oh, all right. So maybe that was it. It's very brief. It's not.
Yeah, it was like
Yeah.
8 pages, 5 pages. It was not much.
Yeah, the report, the data that feeds the report, they shared with Vicky in terms of, what is actually owed to Ulysses and Covert. Their public report, which is what they just released last week, is fairly short and to the point.
Yeah, that definitely.
All right.
I would be remiss in asking on behalf of my colleague, Mother Bonds, did they opine on the proper handling of money paid to the village from the towns, but not spent at the end of the fiscal year, and where that is accounted for?
They didn't opine, but I asked. And Steve, and what was the other one's name? Steve was the primary auditor. He's a nice guy, very kind of more laid back. Dave was much more emphatic, which was, I don't want to put words in the guy's mouth, but he basically said that, I don't want to get the guy in trouble. Village money is village money. When the village gets paid for something, it belongs to the village. And the notion, the idea that a payment for service is somehow allocated to that service when there's an underage is silly. But at the same time, he said, but you can do what you want with it. So if you want to give someone a rebate on next year's contract price, then that's up to you. But his opinion was that when anyone provides a service for a fee, that fee is income. And he did also confirm what I've said, which is if you make a mistake and you're short, that's on you. That's on the village. So it was less of an opining and more of an answer to a direct question. And primarily it was actually, we got off on a bit of a tangent that day. We were talking about water and so forth. So whether water revenue had any other potential purpose in the future kind of thing.